often get asked the question about where I grew up, what were the early days of my life like. And so if I can just give you a little brief history of what that was all about. I was born in Zambia, in northern Rhodesia, came to southern Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, in the age of 3, and then went to a senior school, which my father and his friend started. My father was a surveyor on a mine there called the Bushtick mine, which closed, a gold mine, and that's why I went up to Zambia to a copper mine there. And then when they came back to Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, they decided that this great infrastructure sitting out about 35 miles from Bulawayo was just not used. It had all the houses, the halls, everything was there except basically sports fields. So they decided to turn it into a school called Fulton College, and I was one of the early members of the school. I think there were 60 of us there when I started, and when I left there were about 200 of us there. So I think that really instilled in me a practical part of my life, because we really had to plant every field. We had to really be pioneers in terms of looking at things and developing things. So I think that really instilled quite a lot of my flair in me at that school. And then from there I went to the University of Cape Town, and having been stuck in the bush for 6 years and arriving in that city of Cape Town, there were other things besides the academic work that I was meant to do, such as wine, woman and song. So I wasn't a great academic. If I was interested in the subject, I, funnily enough, would get incredible marks in it. But if I wasn't interested, I had a great difficulty in it. And it took me 7 years to do a 3-year degree. And only 4 years I did full time, and then 3 years when I realized that I'd been beaten by a stupid academic qualification, I went back at night and finished it. So while everybody else was enjoying a lot more wine, woman and song, I was studying again. But I think that was a lesson in life. Don't give up, don't get beaten. So I obviously got my degree, a Bachelor of Commerce. And then it wasn't long after that my first job was with SPAR, and the central office, as we called it then, was in Cape Town, and I was in the central office there. And I can remember being an assistant in the accounts department there, and if I made a mistake I was told to add the phone book. So today I can probably calculate and add a lot quicker than you can do on your iPhone or whatever else. And then from there, the SPAR wholesaler and the SPAR central office, and we had all these wholesalers. And one particular one in Port Elizabeth, called Stefrek at the time, I was particularly interested in the guy who owned it. I think we got on very well. But anyway, that didn't happen. Funnily enough, the marketing lecturer at the university, whose husband worked at a bus company called Golden Arrow, she said to her husband, "There's a guy in my class that I think you should employ. He asks intelligent questions, and I think he would add value to your business." So I was interviewed to work at the Golden Arrow bus company in Cape Town. And the first time round, I wasn't that keen, so I sort of brushed it off. And then he said to me, "Well, I want you to meet the owner." And I went to the owner's office, and he convinced me to join them. And I joined them, and fortunately, that lasted about 6 months, because I soon realized that a corporate big company was not going to be for me. And I was really stuck in an office and did very little. And so that job lasted about 6 months. And then what happened was the SPAR wholesaler in Port Elizabeth, I called him and he said, "Right, you've got a job, come to Port Elizabeth." So I arrived in Port Elizabeth in a mini miner, the dog and a pregnant wife, in 1969, and got a job at what we call Stefrek Wholesalers. And then we opened cash and carries all around the country. So we had Bloemfontein, Bethlehem, Kimberley, Worcester, George, and Port Elizabeth. And then in 1974, we sold the business to Metro Cash and Carry. So with my big share out of that was 10,000 Rand, I then went in and bought Penguin Pools. And that was the start of my career into the construction business. And from building pools, we started to build tennis courts, then we built roads, and then we started a transport company, a plant hire company, and a crane company. And in 1979, that was the first real inflation in one of the depressions, and I lost everything. So that was probably my university of life. And I always look back and say to myself, there's always an opportunity where there's a problem. And the opportunity there was to be able to start again. You soon realize that if you can count your friends on one hand, you've probably got a lot. You have a lot of acquaintances in business who want to know you for what you have or what you can do for them, which I understand and respect, but real friends are few and far between. So that taught me that. And I started again with on my own with doing what I call broking and plant hire and crane hire. And I started building swimming pools again. And I went to America and learned how to build a proper half Olympic pool. And we built one of the first in South Africa at Victoria Park here. And then we were quite successful in that and got off the ground again. And it wasn't long before I bought the crane business back. And we started the journey again with my partner, who's still a partner today, Gary Rhodes. And we had our plant hire and crane hire business. But I want to go back a step or two, because when I talk to you about the early days of Zimbabwe, I must also, I recollect and go back, and I mentioned that my father was in the cattle business and that there was a huge reserve there that had its own private game reserve on it. But I think more important than that, 3 of his friends bought 3 farms together in the Matopas. That's where Rhodes was buried, and it was quite close to that. It was near a mission station. And when I told Ian Player about the journey in those Matopa hills, in those rocks, and all those Bushman paintings and the things that we saw there, I think that also resonated a lot with me in terms of just wanting to have my piece of Africa and rewild it and be able to give something back. When I go back in time and I think about the first years in Port Elizabeth and working at Stefrak and as the U-Pay and Take It, I also think back about the things that I was doing, call it on the side or in the time that I was there. I brought the first spring door to Port Elizabeth. In the old days, you used to have weights when you lifted your garage door that pulled it up, and then we created a company called Easy Doors. And then in those days, the doctors had a beeps system that they got a beep and phone the office or whatever. So we commercialized the first beeping system in this town called Pageboy, and that used to send you a message to phone the office or give us a call when you get to somewhere. And that we did successfully with, and I sold that business on probably too early before the cell phones came out. But that was quite an interesting ride that we did with that. And then, when I think of the various other things, we brought the first Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise to Port Elizabeth, and it was just the case of I knew who had the franchise in Cape Town, and he introduced me to the Americans in Johannesburg, and they gave us the first franchise in Port Elizabeth. So I still have scars on my hands from cooking chicken in those days, and that was in the early 70s. So there have been a number of journeys that I've had in business, but I think probably obviously the most special one has been involved with tourism and conservation and wildlife, and what we're doing throughout Africa now in that space. And it's given me the opportunity to travel the world to meet the most incredible people that I could ever wish to meet. And I'm sure you're going to enjoy the interviews with a lot of those that are still alive today about the journey and how they influenced me in my life. But I just think back, and all of this probably couldn't have happened if it hadn't been for quite a special lady in my life. And while I was running around doing all this, she was bringing up 3 children, Angela, Paul and Murray, and thankfully Paul and Murray are involved in the business. Angela's obviously taken a leaf out of my book and very involved in education, and started her farm school, which is very successful today. So, but the family part of it is what I believe is a success in life. So if you can make a success of business and a success of your family, which is, I'm not sure which is the most difficult, but it's obviously worth that journey if you can do both roads together.